This is Rabbi Jeffrey Sachs of Atid and Web Yeshiva with another installment in our series on the history and mechanics of Torah She-Baal Peh, examining the Rambam's Akdama LePerush HaMishnayot. Visit WebYeshiva.org to experience the full array of our interactive online shiurim. Okay, good evening, everyone. That little intro that I do is for the benefit of the people that'll listen to the recorded session afterwards in the archives. If you have a webcam, please hit the send video panel so that we can all enjoy your presence with us online. Let me just say welcome to everyone, to Barbara and to Esther and to Howard out in California, right, Howard? And Sherry Stuart Gottlieb. I think that you're new. I'm not sure. I'm going to unmute you. Do you have a microphone, Stuart? Yes, but you can talk if you'd like. You have an open mic right now. Where are you joining us from? Okay. You might be having trouble with your mic, so just chat to us where you're from. And hello to Yael, who's also here with us in Israel, and to of course the intrepid Yair. And so again, if you have a video, hit the video, send video. If you don't have a video, go ahead and get yourself one. Treat yourself to a microphone as well. From Cedarhurst, well, welcome. We have been examining the Rambam's Akdama LePerush HaMishnayot for a little while now, in which the Rambam outlines what I've called the history and mechanics of Torah She-Baal Peh, how everything works from the time Moses came down from the mountain up until our time. But by our time, he of course means his time. If we have an opportunity, we may even go beyond that. The fifth section, or the fifth chapter, the part that we got up to last time and dipped our toes into, deals with the whole question of Agadah, the whole question of the non-legal portions of the Torah She-Baal Peh, particularly the Agadot in the Gemara and in the Midrash, and how those work and why they're there, what they're doing there in what otherwise I guess is considered to be a legal work. It's a little strange for people that are familiar with parsing legal texts, that in the middle of everything you'll have these midrashic components. Because we dealt with this topic at great length over the course of 3 sessions when we studied together, many of you were with us when we studied a different teaching of the Rambam, the Rambam's Akdama LePerek Chelek. 2 semesters ago, we studied that. So today I sent out an email. I hope that you got it. And if not, if you go to our Shiur's homepage on Web Yeshiva, you'll see the links. I put up links to 3 recordings of those old Shiurim where the Rambam deals with Agadah. It's a parallel text in the Rambam's introduction to the 10 Hedron, which is well known. All of you know this, whether you know it or not, where the Rambam outlines his 13 principles of faith. So on his way to getting around to describing those 13 principles of faith, the Rambam also there has a lengthy discussion of Agadah. The reason he does that there is because since all of our knowledge of Olam Haba, all of our knowledge of the world to come and eschatology and Yemot HaMashiach and the Messianic era, and all of those things which are the central focus of that text, who is entitled to get into the world to come, since all of our knowledge of those things emanate from Agadic texts, the Rambam feels it necessary to give us some guidance and some background to Agadah and to its proper mode of interpretation, and why Chazal, the sages, wrote and wrote in that manner and decided to encapsulate their wisdom in sometimes in rather well, certainly in an unusual way, through the guise of metaphor and mashal and parable and things of that nature. So over there in the Hagdama Leperek Chelik, the Rambam has a discussion of Agadah, which greatly parallels that which appears here. We understand why he does that here in our text, because if he's explaining to you what the Torah She-Baal Peh is, what the rabbinic law, the oral law is, so he's obviously going to have to address this topic of Agadah. On that occasion, 2 semesters ago, when we spent 3 shiurim talking about the Rambam's take on this topic, we also studied the parallel part from here. So even though some of you are, since I know that those of you that have been with us before, you make it a habit to review. That's the benefit of the archives. You review what it is that we've studied before. So I didn't want to go over it again completely from scratch, but I did send out these links to these 3 shiurim. They're an MP3. You can download them to your iPod or your other MP3 listening device. And you can also get, from those links, you can also get the accompanying texts that we studied. And you know, you can fill that in on your own, as it were. But I'm not going to repeat that. But for those that are just following along in the archives, I wanted to be clear that we've skipped a central component here in the Rambam's treatment of Torah She-Baal Peh because we've done it already in the past. The Rambam now moves on to a different topic, which also seems to be unusual and also seems to be somewhat out of left field, to use a baseball metaphor. For those non-Americans, you can Google it and find out what that means. And that has to do with this question of Tachlit HaAdam. What is the purpose of, pardon the gendered language, of man, but of mankind? What is a person's purpose in this world? Now this seems like a very drastic leap for the Rambam. Until now, he's been addressing a historical legal question. The Torah She-Baal Peh, the interpreted tradition of the Torah Shebechtav, of the Bible, of the Chumash, the normative rules that we have that guide our lives, the source of halacha, where does that come from? How does it work? Where you may recall some of these things. What's a halacha Moshe Sinai? We talked about that at some length. Moshe comes down from the mountain. He's holding, well, I mean, let's speak metaphorically. He gets the Torah. We talked in the past about exactly what did he get. He probably didn't get the whole Torah from the Bet and Bereshit to the Lamed and Le'enei Kol Yisrael, because it didn't all happen yet. We discussed that machloket about how the Torah in its totality was given over the course of 40 years, etc. But certainly when he comes down from the mountain, he has something, even if it's merely the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 Commandments. You know, Shavuot is coming up in about the 10 days or so, 11 days or so. So, you know, we think about those kinds of things. But when he comes down with this written text, whatever it is that he comes down with, it's a written text. No written text has any meaning unless you know how to read it, unless you know how to interpret it. Somebody was just telling me a story. Who was it? It's not important. About Rabbi Soloveitchik. They were telling a story of their student days when they were students of Rabbi Soloveitchik. So I guess the story must have taken place in the 60s, given how old this person is. And somebody was having some kind of debate with the person said, well, you know, in the Sfarim it says ... You know, Sfarim, in other words, if you don't, it's always a good fail-safe to say, in the Sfarim, right? In the books it says. Like if you don't have the exact quote at hand. To say, in the Sfarim it says. So Rabbi Soloveitchik stopped him and said, Sfarim are stupid. People are smart. Meaning, a book, we have a tremendous amount of respect and awe for books. We surround ourselves with books. Right? I'm sitting here in my study, and you can see that, like, I have, thank God, lots and lots and lots of books. But books are passive repositories of knowledge. A book can't be wise. That sounds almost heretical, because we discuss and we describe and we ascribe the wisdom that are in the books, the wisdom of the Torah itself. But you know that the Torah itself, black on white, even though, there's this, in Moment magazine, I saw a link to it today. In Moment magazine this month, they did some kind of symposium where they asked people, famous Jews, to talk about what the contribution of Judaism has been to the world. And, everyone from, from Elie Wiesel to people of letters, to Mel Brooks, to, et cetera, Jerry Seinfeld, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And everybody keeps using this expression, the people of the book, that we gave the book to the world. Well, the book, the Chumash, of course, please don't take me out of context. Somebody will listen to part of this recording, and I'll be in a lot of trouble, because I'll be taken out of context. But the book itself is only as worthwhile as our interpretation of it. And in fact, many people, through access to the book, have done all types of things with it, and have done all types of things in its name. So our ability to make sense of the book, our interpretation, the oral tradition, is what's central, is what's key. Not in any way to diminish from the wonder and magnificence of the Torah Shebechtav. The Rambam here takes an odd turn. And moving away from the discussion of the legal component of the Torah She-Baal Peh, the interpretive component of the Torah She-Baal Peh, he takes a leap into something out of a different playbook of his, a parallel text to his Hilchot Deot, to his introduction to Hilchot Deot, which is called the Shmona Prakim, the 8 chapters, which might also be something that would be worthwhile for us to study. I'm sorry, I said Hilchot Deot. I didn't mean Hilchot Deot. I mean the Shmona Prakim of the Rambam, which is another one of these freestanding essays in his Mishna commentary, which is a parallel text to Hilchot Deot, to his laws of personality theory. That's a very loose translation. But the Shmona Prakim deal with questions of how does one develop the right, what we call midot, personality traits, what the Rambam called deot, opinions, literally opinions. That says a lot about the Rambam's conception of the personality and the link between the personality and the intellect. About that maybe on a different time. And suddenly, in the scope of this interpretation of the oral law, the Rambam starts talking about what is the purpose of man. What are we all about? Now, I'm going to hold off on offering an opinion as to what this is doing here in this text we've been studying, but try to think about that as we move along, and to try to figure out what is this doing here, smack dab in the middle of the discussion of Torah She-Baal Peh. The Rambam says, "Da ki hakadmonim hakru hakira nifla'a." The kadmonim, the ancients, the ones that have come before us. He might be referring to Chazal. He might also be referring to Aristotle. The Rambam, of course, was fluent in the teachings, the philosophy of Aristotle. The Moreh Nevuchim, the Guide to the Perplexed, is largely or very significantly an attempt to reconcile Aristotelian philosophy with our Torah philosophy, and the Rambam was certainly no stranger to that. He says, those that have come before us, the ancients, they made a wonderful investigation, a chakira. Asher haya lahem min hachokma v'tov hamachshava v'hit'am'et etzlam shekol davar nimtza yesh lo be'achreach tachlit. They worked under an assumption. I'm translating loosely. I'm not translating literally. They were mit'amet. They came to a truth that everything in creation, by definition, has a purpose. That's an assumption. It's an assumption that people of a certain orientation are apt to subscribe to. Other worldviews don't necessarily adopt this point of view. But the idea that everything in creation has a purpose. Asher b'shvila hayta mitziuto. Ki ein shum davar shnimtza levatala. Nothing exists lehem zeh hamishpat haklali. And when these ancients, whomever they were, when they arrived at this truth, this general principle, achelu b'ferut kol hamitziut. So he's describing a process in the history of ideas, the history of science, the history of philosophy. That once you reach this conclusion, like the apple, the apocryphal apple falling from the tree, after which the dominoes start falling until Newton arrives at his conclusions, once the nofel ha'asimon, as we say here in Israel, once the, whatever the equivalent turn of phrase is in English, once you realize that everything exists for a purpose, so you begin examining reality through that perspective. Ladat tachlit kol min haminim. You start to investigate the purpose of each and every object, each and everything in existence. V'ra'u ki kol nimtza melachuti tachlito yedua. So with a nimtza melachuti, an artificial creation, something which has been manufactured, not a bunny rabbit or a blade of grass, but something which has been manufactured by man, tachlito yedua. Its purpose is well known. Ein sorech bezeh lechakira, and you don't need to have some kind of philosophical investigation of it. Ufi sheyotzro lo yitzrenu ela imkein kvar nitztayru tachlito benafsho, because the creator of that object, the manufacturer of that object, would not have created it without a purpose, and here he uses an Aristotelian phrase, imkein kvar nitztayru tachlito benafsho, that the purpose was outformed in the soul of the creator. This idea that there's an ideal or an abstract, and then it's built in reality. That there's some kind of abstract ideal notion of a chair or of a table. Those are the Aristotelian examples. I think the table is the example. That there's something called a table that doesn't exist in this world, but it's an idealized, abstract notion of what tablehood is. And then a carpenter takes some wood and some nails or whatever he uses to build it, and he builds a table in this world. And there's some kind of, in the same way that a building has a relationship to a blueprint. The blueprint is an abstract representation, lines on paper, that is meant to be reflected in reality, so too here there's this abstract, idealized notion of chair or table, which then gets made into reality. Rabbi Soloveitchik also borrows these notions in his Ish Halacha, in his magnum opus, the halachic man, to describe a notion of an abstract halacha, not the halacha of dinim, of the bracha for an apple is borei pri ha'etz, but a kind of abstractified notion of halacha, which is reflected in this world. Those of you that are familiar with that essay, the Ish Halacha, I hope that resonates with what the Rambam here is talking. So, lemashal, the Rambam then gives an example. Omar shehamasor, a saw. Lo asa'u hanapach ela achar shechashav eich yichol la'afrid chibur ze ha'etz. So the metalsmith who's making the saw. So when he sets out to make a saw, even imagine the first person that made a saw. The first person that made a saw. So he had a notion of what the purpose was. That there was an idea, necessity is the mother of invention. We have a block of wood. We want to be able to divide the wood in half. A saw is the tool. The notion of the saw, its form and function and purpose is already engraved in the imagination of the original tool maker. And then the saw is built to answer that need, or answer that tachlit. Again, tachlit is one of these funny words. We use it colloquially today. We talk about tachlis. Like even in Hebrew, it's sometimes pronounced in its Yiddish version, tachlis, which means like practical. What's its purpose? Like people talk about, like dating and tachlis, and like, in other words, if a boy's going out on a date with a girl, it's in order to, for some practical purpose, probably with marriage in mind. But tachlit, from the lashon of kol, the shoresh of tachlit, kol, right? Meaning the entirety of a person, like we say at the end of Sefer Kohelet, right? Et Elokim yirav et mitzvotav shamor, ki ze kol ha'adam. This is the entirety. This is the definition. This is the purpose of the Adam. But kol, yes, probably that's the definition. It's the definition. Like we say in Kiddush, vayechulu hashamayim va'aretz, from the same word. That kol and vayechulu are from the same root, meaning everything, and also the vayechulu means to complete, right? To complete the work of creation. To complete meaning to finish it, to end it. It's the end. The end in the sense of the purpose, like ends and means. So that's what. So tachlit is a word that kind of contains within it many shades of meaning, not contradictory meanings, but complementary meanings. So that's the tachlit of the saw. But for a manufactured item, something that a hammer, a saw, what have you, so we make things that have a purpose. Now it's interesting. What's the obvious question on the Rambam here? Can anyone think of an obvious question on the Rambam?
Yes. Why did God make man?
No, that's the ultimate. Esther asks, Esther asks, why did God make man? That's the ultimate question here. But here at this point in the Rambam says that manufactured items, things that people make, chairs, tables, saws, hammers, they all have a purpose. And you can look at, you can land from Mars and never have been to a hardware store in your life and look at a hammer and pretty easily intuit how it works and what its purpose is. So the Rambam says that all manufactured items are like this. Their purpose is clear. Do you all agree with that? Can you think of examples where that wouldn't hold?
Yeah, electrical equipment. Don't know that.
That's only because you're a little technophobic, Esther. So I don't know, and Yair mentions a ball or a tissue. I don't know, but in other words, once you saw, in other words, if you saw a tissue and you didn't know what it was, so it might initially evade you, but like with enough work, you'd figure out that, you know, it's a good solution to your runny nose. But don't think so concretely. I'm not sure if that's true, Joel. Joel says that if you show to a bushman, you know, some type of primitive a hammer. So first of all, they have hammers. I don't think that there are any, even the most primitive people, wherever they are in darkest Africa, they all have hammers. So Yael, I think, is closest to what I was thinking, is art, poetry, and music. That there's things that we create that don't have immediate purpose. Now, the anthropologists will tell us that they do have a purpose. They'll explain to us what was the purpose of pre-modern man in making music and in you know, certainly in art, what those cave paintings were about. But that's true that they have purpose, but it's different than the concrete example the Rambam is giving about you know, the hammer and the saw. It becomes more complicated in our day when we have artists that will tell us that their art has no purpose, which was not, I think, something that artists, you know, up until modern art would have said. But today, artists will tell us that the art has no purpose. It's merely the extension of their neshama, of their soul, or their mind, depending upon whichever orientation they have. And they, you know, there are artists that will tell us that the whole attempt to find meaning in the art beyond the visceral experience of encountering it is, you know, is a pointless task, because the point of the art is the art, and there's nothing beyond it. That's a question in contemporary theory of art. I'm not sure that I personally go for that, but even if we take the artist at his word, there's still, in other words, if the point of the art is to be the extension of his imagination or his soul or his inner muse, so that itself is a purpose. That itself has a purpose. Although I admit that the Rambam does not address it here, and we might need to understand more about the Rambam's theory of the aesthetic in order to understand what he would say about art. Well, that's, in other words, Barbara, that's a theory about what art is. Not all artists would subscribe to that. Yael asks, Yael, do you mind if I unmute you and you'll just explain to us what you mean? Go ahead.
Question
the question in the paragraph, the question in the Rambam, if I understand it, is he's saying that it seems that if that he thinks that if the purpose of something is immediately apparent, but the purpose of art is not immediately apparent. Well,
right. So that was my question. I'm just going to mute you because we have a little echo here. That was my question on the Rambam, to which I admit I don't here have a complete answer. It could be that he's talking about certain very practical creations, and that art would have to be in a category unto its own. It's also possible that in the times of the Rambam, art, music, even literature. I mean, literature. You can't talk about literature in the 12th century the same way we talk about it today. There were no novels. That the purposes were much more apparent than art is today. I mean, if you look at a Rothko, painting, so you can like it or you can not like it, but you are confronted with the question of what is this about? That's probably not true for whatever art was hanging either in the house of the Rambam in 12th century Cairo or in the palace of the Sultan that he was treating in 12th century Cairo. Art probably served a much more utilitarian purpose. It was something to decorate your home. Let me just take a look at some of these chats. Right. So Joel mentions there's a theory that implies that there's not permanent purpose of art except the purpose assumed by the artist creating the work of art. Again, that reflects what I was saying, but that's more of a contemporary art theory that might not have held true for artists in the 12th century or before. Certainly think of portraits. Think of all those great portraits of Rembrandt or Vermeer, let's say. Those serve the same purpose that these photographs of my grandparents on the shelf do. I want to have a permanent reminder. There was no photography, of course, so you had to have a picture. You had to have a portrait painted. A portrait of a person is a very, you look at the picture and it's pretty apparent what it's doing, what purpose it serves, in a different way than a hammer or a saw. And a chinami. You could look at Vermeer, even though he's earning a living, some of his paintings, in other words, some of the paintings are works of art, and other paintings he's serving the purpose of the local photographer to have a lasting portrait of a girl with a pearl earring, or whomever it is in your family that you want. You want the equivalent of a photograph of. That doesn't mean that it's not an incredibly moving work of art, that he's doing something there which speaks to us throughout generation, that it communicates all types of things. It communicates feeling and pathos and etc. I mean, that novel about the girl with the pearl earring, I didn't read the novel. I mean, but I'm aware of what the novelist was doing there. Look at this painting. It's this picture of a young girl with a pearl earring. If you don't know what I'm talking about, Google "girl with pearl earring," and you'll see that famous picture. Alan doesn't seem to be with us tonight. Usually he's posting these links. And some novelists, some 20th century novelists, looks at this painting from 17th and says, "Wow, there's a backstory here," and their imagination is so fired by this one painting that you can create this whole backstory of who this girl was, in that we don't know anything about the subject of that particular painting. So obviously that all comes through, but in terms of looking at it and seeing and intuiting what the purpose of it is, we've gone a little bit far afield with this side point about art, which actually is not discussed by the Rambam, but it is the obvious question on what he's saying here. But let's go back to his metaphor of your tool bucket. You look at a hammer. It's intuitive what the hammer is. You look at a saw. It's intuitive what the saw is. Tachlito yadua. Its purpose is known. Ein tzarich b'zeh l'chakira. Lefi sheyotzro lo yitzrena ela im kein kvar nitztayru tachlito b'nafsho. Limashal deso. Right? That's where we were. Harei shetachlit hamasor linasirbo. The purpose of a saw is to saw. The purpose of a hammer is to hammer. V'kein tachlit hakardum lachtochbo, of a hatchet. V'hamachat l'chaberbo beged el beged, and a needle and thread. V'kach kol hadvarim asher nimtzu mitziut melachutit. Any manufactured good, the Rambam claims, and again, we can ask questions about what about this example, what about that example, but I think his point is understood. If you look at a manufactured item, its purpose is apparent. Aval ma shehimtziato hamlacha ha'elokit ve'chochma hativ'it כגון מיני האילנות ומיני העשבים ומיני המכתבים ומיני האבנים ומיני החיות, but the natural world, the God-created world, trees and plants and animals and stones, יש מהם שתכליתו מושגת בחקירה מועטה. There are some things whose purpose is apparent after a little bit of examination. And other things require a little more work. And there are some things in the natural world whose purpose is fleeting and unapparent to us and hides ne'elemet. The meaning hides itself from us. Ad shelo tivadeh klal. Until it is unknown to us. Ela imkain noda'a b'nivu'ah, unless it should be revealed to us through prophecy, or b'koach yedi'at hanistarot, or through the wisdom of hidden things. To this, the Rambam probably is referring to some type of getting at knowledge, which isn't necessarily apparent. Aval b'chakira mada'it efshar, but through scientific examination, it's not going to reveal itself. Mipnei she'ein b'yicholet ha'adam lachkor v'leida lama himtzi hateva ha'nimalim miktzatan b'knafayim u'miktzatam. But there's certain things that we just can't understand. Like, why does nature create ants? And why are there some ants, this may not be the ants that we know, but these insects, these tiny insects. It happens some tiny insects fly, and some tiny insects don't fly. Some have wings, some don't have wings. mirubot raglayim v'acherot mu'atot raglayim mihin. And how come you have millipedes and centipedes? Why do you have some with X number of legs and some with Y number of legs? You ever see a centipede up close? It's really kind of gross. Uma tachlit zot hatola'at v'zot hanimala. And what's the purpose of this worm? And what's the purpose of that ant? And what is the purpose of this ladybug? Etc., etc., etc. But creatures larger than the ant, whose purpose is a little more apparent, so it's a little easier to rationalize and to figure out what it's all about. And the more you work at it, the more you'll know. And the clearer creation will become. Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, You know, they say he was very smart. And the wisdom that God designated to him, that he should know all types of things, yada mitachliot ele haminim ma she'efshar l'adam ba'asher hu adam leda. So Shlomo, the Rambam says Shlomo, even though Shlomo HaMelech was a person, and all people, by definition, a person is going to be limited in his ability to understand this realm of things, the purposes of creation. So he seems to have had it more than others. V'diber al tachliot ha'ilanot v'asavim u'minei ha'chayot. Amar HaKatuv is a pasuk in Sefer Malachim that says, V'yedaber al ha'etzim min ha'erez asher b'Lebanon v'ad ha'ezov asher yetzei bakir. Now this pasuk, could somebody take a crack at translating this pasuk? V'yedaber al ha'etzim min ha'erez asher b'Lebanon v'ad ha'ezov asher yetzei bakir. Anybody want to take a crack at explaining that pasuk? You have to translate it. You can just explain it. Raise your hand. I'll pass you the microphone. No one? No one? Okay. The pasuk literally means that Shlomo spoke al ha'etzim, al meaning about. He was able to talk about etzim. What kind of etzim? From the grandest cedars of Lebanon, you know, the Arzei Halvanon, the cedars of Lebanon. Those are they're like the sequoias. Like if the Tanakh wants to talk about a tree, the treeness, the greatest, the strongest, the most distinct tree, it talks about an erez. Or the Ezov Asher Yatsa Bakir. An Ezov is a kind of shrub that grows sometimes in the cracks of walls. Like in the kotel, between the cracks in the walls, there are shrubs that come out. I don't know if those are technically the Ezov, but it's a lower plant. It's a lowly kind of plant. One is a plant of great majesty, and another is a very common type of thing. So Shlomo was able to speak about all of those things, and he was able Vayedaber al habehema. Vayedaber al habehema v'al ha'of v'al haremes v'al hadagim, and he was able to speak about animals and birds and creepy crawly things and fish, etc. Now the midrash on this pasuk, turns Shlomo into Dr. Dolittle. And from this pasuk we get the notion that Shlomo HaMelech was able to speak to the animals. He was able to talk to the animals. You know the song. I don't need to sing it for you. But the shot of the pasuk is that he was able to talk about all of these things. Not that he was some kind of early naturalist. Not that he was some kind of early naturalist that he knew a lot about things, but he was able to talk about their purposes. Now the truth is that's what the naturalists did. That was actually part of what Darwin was doing. If you read The Voyage of the Beagle, his early work of going around and looking at them, to look at animals and to make these intuitions about why did God create them in this way? Why did evolution favor this over that? If what are the benefits of being created this way, and how is that going to give you an advantage in the battle for survival? So that's what the Rambam is talking. The Rambam probably did not subscribe to that midrashic notion the Rambam arch rationalist that he was, that Shlomo HaMelech was able to actually speak to the animals, and even more profoundly, or more difficult to understand, speak to the trees. But the Rambam reads in this pasuk that Shlomo, because of his wisdom, was able to approach the greatest, deepest understanding of the purposes of creation, which is something that's open to us with enough effort, but only partially open to us. Because there are certain things when we confront the natural world, there are certain things that we're going to have to throw our hands up at. The scientist ultimately is going to have some degree of modesty and say, we don't know. This is only speculation. There are certain things that are still hidden to us. And ultimately we'll crack that and we'll discover what they are, but other mysteries will present themselves. The Rambam goes on, והיה זה לעד שיש בו כוח אלוקי. ואמר אחר זה ויבואו מכל העמים לשמוע את חוכמת שלמה וכולי. So this was kind of the tipping point with Shlomo. His profound insight into the natural world and the purposes of the natural world was what tipped everyone else off that he was really very smart, so that the people of all the world would listen to what he had to say. אך על דרך הכלל, כל הנמצאים מתחת גלגל הירח אמנם הומצאו בשביל האדם בלבד. Then the Rambam states another principle, which again emanates from a certain worldview. Just like the Rambam stated a principle in the beginning, that everything in creation has a purpose. Now again, that is not something that all moderns subscribe to, but it is a reflection of a certain worldview. The Rambam now says that the entire created world was created for the service of man, בשביל האדם לבדו, בלבד. שכל מיני החיות מהם למזונו, כצאן ובקר וזולתם. Certain animals were created. I'm not sure, maybe there might be some vegetarians amongst us, but the Rambam's conception was certainly that animals were created to serve man, and that we can even eat them. Now, this is an idea which the radical animal rights folks disagree with very strongly, but it seems to be the conventional way of looking at it, and certainly throughout up until the modern era was certainly seen that way. Now, this is of course something of a paradox. The Torah says that we have this notion of tsar balei chayim, that we can't cause any harm to animals, that the Torah forbids the inflicting of pain to animals. The idea set out very early in Sefer Bereshit that man's purpose in the world, avda u'lishamra, to work and to guard the land. That becomes the leitmotif of the environmentalists. But our goal is to be, our purpose here is to be the guardian of the created world in which we live. But yet, the Torah also allows us to that yes, the animals are there to serve us, but we have to show a certain amount of respect for the created world that we live in. And animals also serve us in ways besides food. You can pack a mule in order to schlep things. And a horse is like, it's like a car. You can use it to travel. You need to get from here to there very quickly. Take a horse. ומהם מינים שלא נדע להם תועלת, ויש בהם תועלות לאדם, לא ידען. And there are other animals whose purposes are not immediately apparent to us. Like, how does the platypus help us? I don't know. We don't even, the platypus is there just to be a mystery. And the same thing with the batanalad. Trees, mehem lemizano. You have apple trees, you have pear trees, you have coconut trees. Umehem l'refuato mimachalatav. And other plants are there because they're medicine. They provide medicine. וכן העשבים, וככה כל המינים, וכל מה שתמצא מבעלי החיים והצמחים שאין בו תועלת, ואינן זן לפי מחשבותיך, הרי זה לחולשת מדענו. And then the Rambam says something really radical. Look at the entire plant world. So you can divide it into three. I mean, he divides it into three. He would probably admit that there are other purposes. You can divide it up into there's the plant world that feeds us, and there's the plant world that clothes us. It's not one of the examples he gives, but I'm sure he would admit to it. And there's the plant world from which we can take and make medicines. And then there's the plant world known to us that's only because of the limits of our own current scientific knowledge. The limits of our own current scientific knowledge. And there's the Rambam in a nutshell. There's nothing that we can't know. Or there's very little that we can't know. And if there's something that we don't know, that means either we haven't worked at it hard enough or we're not ready. But the purpose of our encounter with creation is to try to figure it out. That's the Rambam in a nutshell. You're meant to look at the world and make sense of it. And looking at the world helps you by looking at the world and making sense of it, by making these intuitions. What's that supposed to do for you? The scientific impulse. What's the goal of that? Know somebody. To know, but for what purpose? Okay, all very good. Okay, I'm not sure, like what we think about Barbara's, attempt to get the scorpion in her bathroom, and how that plays into all of this. But I guess, we asked the question what the scorpions are for. But again, I'll just read quickly through the chats. To know, why are we here? To understand how things work. What are we? But this is the world's purpose vis-a-vis man. Basis of life. If God made the world for us, we should understand it. Yafeh, Yael. Right? In other words, we're in this world. The world is here to serve us. Our task is to understand that world because that's part of the riddle of creation. Right? Let's make it I disappear. Okay. Right. In other words, that's the riddle of creation. That's the riddle of our own existence. Because if we look at the platypus and we don't understand what it is, the platypus is there to remind us that no matter how much we want to classify the world, and that work of classification, that work that the 19th century naturalists were doing, that's God's work. That's God's work of figuring out how the world works. And creation itself is going to throw us a monkey wrench. The platypus, it's like, God took all the leftover pieces and smacked them all together. It's part beaver, it's part duck, it lays eggs, it gives milk, it's etc. Obviously, but that's the point. We don't understand it. And if we don't understand it, that means we have more work to do. And maybe b'mot HaMashiach, like it'll all be clear. No, so that's speculation. That's speculation, that it's some kind of missing link. But it messes up the neatness of this idea that every time we take 3 steps forward in our understanding, every now and then you have to make a retreat. And that's a healthy thing. That's a healthy thing. And to understand that there are limits to our knowledge, limits to, because of the chulshat da'atenu, that's a healthy thing. Not only because it makes us a drop more modest, but because it pushes us on further to keep working at. Now, all of this, we're coming to a close now. We'll have to continue with this next time. You're welcome to read ahead. You can download this from the website. All of this is leads to the larger question. The Rambam is just setting us up for a larger question, which Esther hinted at in the beginning of our discussion. What are we here for? What's our purpose? What's our purpose? So if you look here, I'm going to put it up. I'm sorry I didn't prepare it beforehand. If you here, in the chat I put up a link. On the Chabad website, they have the entire Mishna Torah of the Rambam available in English. So if you look at Chapter 10, Halacha 2, Chapter 10, Perek Yud, Halacha Bet, the Hebrew is also available online. You know, on our website, on the WebYeshiva website, at the bottom, there are links at the bottom. There's one link for online Sfarim. We put together links to, like, all of the Jewish books that are available online. So if you don't happen to own a Mishnah Torah, you can get one online, and now I just sent you a link to it in English as well. Look at Hilchot Tshuva, Chapter 10, Halacha 2, before we meet next time. And try to figure out how that fits into oh, wait a second. That halacha is true, but also there's a different halacha. Look in Hilchot Yesodei Torah. I'll send you a link for that also. One sec. Here. Hilchot Yesodei Torah, Chapter 2. Chapter 2. Like the first few halachot there, halacha 1, halacha 2, maybe even halacha 3. So look at that before next time, and try to figure out how that other passage in the Rambam correlates with what he's talking about here. And then go back to our opening question, what in the world does all of this have to do with the history of Torah She-Baal Peh? What is this chapter doing in this work that has to do with how the Chachamim did the Torah She-Baal Peh and how rabbinic law works? That's a question that we have to figure out. Okay, so I wish you Shabbat Shalom. Until next time, if you have any questions, I will stay on. And if not, then we will meet again next week.